The Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. It's been a week since we had a wee chat. My goodness, what a week. What a week. We got plenty to talk about and plenty to discuss. I know there's a lot of anger out there, a lot of interest out there, and hopefully we can help pull some of it together. And I'm joined today by fresh in from the United States of America, down in Londinium just now. There's Phil. Phil, welcome back, my friend. Horrific journey you had.
Well, life, innit? It's blizzards in North Dakota and Minnesota, and then back into Blighty in Londinium, as you say. So, yeah, it's all right down here. It's much nicer, actually. The weather's really good. Stuff to do, but if I can get out of the way today, I might make it up the road tonight. I was planning to be in Dundee. I might still make it. Let's see, but it looks like it's going awry, I'm afraid. But let's see.
Well, we'll know soon enough. And then closer to it, also definitely going to Dundee and there in Clickmannishire, or maybe even in Dundee already. Or Eva, are you in Dundee yet?
Well, Roddy, we've been having an independence focused weekend. So we were in Coatbridge in the Great Eagle at Rebel HQ on Thursday for Alec. We're in Dundee now, having been in Arbroath earlier, visiting the home of the Great Declaration. We'll be at the Dundee Gathering tonight, and on Tuesday we'll be in Glasgow for the Alba Laku meeting. So it's all go on the Independence Trail for this party.
Absolutely. And down there in the borders, I think it's where our Dr. Yvonne Ridley is. Yvonne, my friend, how are you?
I'm fine. It's really sunny down here, and I've got the Prism dog with me, Bertie, who was in Coatbridge the other night. And
did you give it some shots when it came back? Make sure it was okay.
He's fine.
That's excellent. And
still on a buzz from Coatbridge. Fantastic.
Yeah, you always get a buzz when you come out of Coatbridge. 30 quid a gram, but that's another story for another day. And also there, we've got in Finland, our favourite diplomat, Daniel. Daniel, my friend, how are you?
Hi, Roddy. Hi, everyone. I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. I'm glad you can all join us for this week. It has been, my dear friends, one heck of a week. And I know from speaking to you all sort of earlier, you're all champing at the bit to go. And we should, because we cannot help but start the programme at the top on the arrest, or not the arrest, well, it was an arrest of the ex-CEO of the SNP, who was later released. And just so you understand, folks, there are certain things that we can say and cannot say, and we're going to stray on the legal line. We don't want to get involved in anything that would upset the police or their inquiries. And our Eva there is our legal will keep us in place. But Phil, I'd like to come to you as an ex-policeman, not as an ex-MP, but as an ex-policeman, about the amount of police resource that was put in place actually to do all this, because they don't do that unless they're serious, which reminded me of a story about a lady who, her husband was away in business, just as you've been in USA. He was away in business, and she noticed intruders in her back garden and saw the torchlight and everything. So she phoned the local police and said, I wonder if you could send some policemen. Someone's, I think, about to break into my house. They're in my garden, they're at my garden shed just now. I'm here in my own, I'm a woman on my own. Could you send someone? And they said, well, we haven't got anyone in the air at the moment. As soon as we can, we'll get someone there quick as we can. So just keep calm. She said, well, I'm really getting scared. Please send someone. And they said, as soon as we can. So she hung up the phone and she phoned back 10 minutes later and she said, it's me again. They said, yes, are they still there? She said, no, don't, it's okay, no rush. She said, my husband's shotgun was in the house and I went out and I shot them. I think they're both dead. So no need to rush. And 10 minutes later, there's a helicopter over our house. There was 14 squad cars in our driveway. And they come in and they found these two guys in our garden shed trying to steal a lawnmower. And they said to the woman, I thought you said you'd shot them. She said, I thought you said you had no resources. So police resources are a shortage, Phil, but they didn't spare any resources on getting, I believe someone told me the count, there was 20 policemen after he'd been arrested and taken away to wherever, I believe it was Falkirk for questioning. There was 20 policemen, there was a 10, there was God knows how many trucks, there was 4 big vans at Jackson's entry, checking out the SNP, the massive amount of resource now. In your experience as an ex-policeman, do you put that amount of resource on a fishing exercise?
Depends. The problem is the politicization of the police now. It was ever a thing. Remember Thatcher? Remember with the miners' strike? She basically bought the police off, and the police became her right hand and basically enforced the will of the government. And it is their job to do it. But the problem here is the depth that the police have been manipulated politically, not just, but they've always been by Westminster and those that drive them, but by the SNP. The SNP have tried to play the judicial system, have tried to play the police, and have used it in the past. This was a show. And the stories about the garden and the people breaking in are typical, because the police are limited. They have resources and there are priorities. Now, if somebody's breaking in for a theft in a garden shed or something like that, it is not as serious as someone being assaulted. It's not as serious as, there's different codes that come out, obviously, and I think most people would go along with that. But no, the politicization of the police is something that we've seen all over the world. And what gets me is, having seen that this is a modus operandi of the British government and the establishment, Nicola and her ilk have danced with this particular devil on the assumption that this devil was their friend. It's the devil. These people are against us. They're against what we stand for. And Nicola and her entourage and those who stand by her, and many of whom are still in the SNP, they still control the SNP, and the establishment still pull the strings within the SNP with Humza in there. The clear out has only just begun, and they will continue to pull the strings. And this show is making sure that everybody sees that they're doing their job, which is no favourites. They have to come down, be seen to be coming hard down on Nicola and her husband, etc. Because it's a mess.
Do you think it was theatre more than serious?
Of course it was. What, you're digging in a garden, allegedly. I mean, who knows what they were doing, but searching a couple of locations, allegedly. I mean, we don't want to comment and stuff like that, but unless you really know what's going on, this number of people and the amount of reporting, and the fact that so many times when the police come to an event, they've been tipped off politically, and the press are there also. It's a game. It's the management of perception. It is politics, and for absolute certain, the police have been used by the establishment on many occasions before, and they will be again. And they will have to be seen, and they put up a big show to make sure there's a large presence there. They're seen to be doing their job because they don't want to be criticised for it. And they also want to make sure everybody sees that they're seen to be doing their job, and they're seen to be prosecuting those in the SNP who are alleged to have been wrongdoers.
Let me ask you, Eva, as a lawyer, how often with clients or do you know, in the legal profession, is someone taken into custody and questioned for 12 hours and released? Is that a frequent event? Is it likely that there will be another arrest?
It's not unusual to be arrested and questioned and released without charge in further investigation. So it's fair to assume that further investigations are being conducted, because that would be the point of the searches that we know have already been carried out. In effect, nothing much to say about that other than watch this space. And in that regard, I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may please, to remind all our viewers who are likely to be independent supporters that the Latin phrase is ignorantia juris neminem excusat. In other words, ignorance of the law is no defence. So let's not any of our viewers be ignorant of the law. The law says in Scotland that once there has been arrest, that a case is alive. And when it's alive, you do not comment inappropriately, because to do so may prejudice the right to a fair trial. Just because other high-profile accused persons in Scotland were the subject of adverse speculation and comment before their trial does not in any way, shape or form justify anybody in Scotland or out with making comment about what has happened here. It would be foolish in the extreme so to do. That said, these are very serious matters. You can see today the impact in the SNP by the way that several of them are now slowly trying to dissociate themselves. The hard, horrible truth, though, is that whatever has been investigated now could have and should have been investigated a couple of years ago with vigour. And had that been done, we might have been looking at a different set of political circumstances in Scotland today, rather than the bourach that we see. So Phil started by explaining what the weather's like in was it North Dakota? I would say here, not being very far from Blairgowrie, the birthplace of Hamish Henderson, there's mair nor a rocht wind blowing through the Great Glens of the world and Scotland today. And by God, that's going to clear out this country, because that's what's needed before we then power our way towards the independence that we so desire.
Absolutely. I should also just add on to that is that we should remember what Lady Dorian said at Craigmurray's trial. The journalists, mainstream media people, the people who are in the establishment have more rights to say and do things than we do. So I personally will be very careful in anything I write, and I would suggest to others to do the same. Yvonne, as Eva's alluded to, there was almost a stampede of people pretending they didn't know what was going on. They're just getting enlightenment, and Holmes was being questioned, and would he be paying legal fees, and he had to think about it. He would look at it. Amazing. And then they hired a lawyer, but again, I don't know if Eva will stop me if I'm stepping over the line, but it seems that that's more for existing employees possibly who have been involved or could be involved, who have been questioned. Maybe that the lawyers are for those people as opposed to for our ex-CEO of the SNP. You're mute.
My attention all this week has been on the social networks and Sky News. This is a huge, huge story, and there's a lot of anger, but I would say that the anger shouldn't be channeled at useful idiots like the First Minister, who, he's called Humza useless. He should be called Humza clueless, because you can tell during his interviews he hasn't a clue what's going on, although he was very clear to assert as soon as Murrell was arrested that he personally had no involvement whatsoever with the finances of the party. And I've no reason to disbelieve him. But he must now be sitting wondering how long he's got left, and must be wondering, as I raised last week, about the legitimacy of his own position as First Minister, because Kate Forbes was apparently talking earlier in the week about wanting a rerun of the election. Just to be clear, I think that probably the most significant event, apart from the arrests that happened, was the resignation of the accountancy company which audits the SNP's accounts. And that company resigned before the police raids. So that is very, very...
Last year, they'd also put an addendum on the accounts to almost distance themselves, along the lines of, we can only audit what we're given. In other words, they were suspicious that something wasn't right in the accounts.
Well, the Financial Reporting Council, which polices the auditors, made quite a hard-hitting report earlier this year, saying that closer scrutiny was appropriate for auditors who earned thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year and can buy a Ferrari. So, of course, the accountancy firms, and I've got no doubt the SNP auditors were in the same boat, are feeling the pressure from their governing body, that they, in fact, very few people now want to become auditors because they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, well, they can only audit what they're given. They can't, if they're not given the full picture, but we don't know. It's pure speculation.
Well, it is, but all auditors now go through the most rigorous inspections themselves to see that they're doing the job right. And so, as I say, for me, the most important thing after the arrests was the fact that the SNP's auditors of 10 years or so stood down, and I don't see a queue of auditors scrambling to take over what must be an almost impossible or mission impossible.
Well, no, actually, I heard the guy that was the auditor for Enron is looking for a gig. He might be interested.
Well, not the chief treasurer of the SNP, who resigned, I think, last year, was allowed to look at the accounts. What have they got to hide? And I think the anger that we're all feeling is probably frustration born out of that hardcore of SNP supporters who are still in bloody denial that everything's fine.
No, we shall see. Daniel, hindsight is the greatest thing going. During the election campaign for the new leadership, was it something I said, Daniel? Was it something I said? You've left me. I'll come back to Daniel on hindsight. Phil, I'll ask you instead, about hindsight. During the campaign, Humza was quick to tell us how wonderful Daniel's back. Hopefully I can do it. Hindsight, yes, Daniel. Sorry. Not a problem. During the campaign, Humza was telling us what a great guy Peter Murrell was, and he would be his CEO, and absolutely everything was hunky-dory. Everything was wonderful at headquarters. And then when the brown stuff hit the rotating blades, he said, and I would like to quote what he said this week, which was, "Whatever else transpires in this case, it is very, very clear that the governance of the party was not as it should be, not the best standard." Hardly, like 2 weeks ago, he was singing a different tune. Are you there, Daniel?
Yes, I'm there. You cut off.
Did you hear the question?
You said hardly 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, he was extolling the virtues of the Peter Murrell, and then, Phil, why don't you answer that?
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, it's appalling. He's Mr. Comes as Mr. Continuity. He is hiding the bodies. He continues to do it. He is the enemy within. And we, the people who champion independence, need to make sure that he and his ilk are removed from the SNP. The current clear out is nowhere near deep. The cut, I mean, the first cut should be the deepest, but it's not. It's not here. It's a shallow skim off. It's a facade. All they've done is scrape the paintwork off. It's the same machine within. And until we get rid of those who have kowtowed and bowed to the establishment and reinstate the vigour, the passion, the unity that we had, then it's not going to happen. It's not going to work for us. And you remember when we think what Humza was doing. I mean, he's a joke. The guy will just continue to do exactly what Nicola and her crew do, because he's part of it, a big part of it. And in the past, traitors like Humza and Mike Russell and all the rest of them, they'd be hung, drawn and quartered. Thank God we're a bit more civilised now, but nonetheless removed from a position of power and strength and influence. They are doing the work of those who oppose our cause, and we all know it, and I know we'll come on to that later, but no, he's Mr. Continuity, and it's not good enough. The guy cannot be trusted.
No, Daniel, we'll try again, my friend. I hope we can get a question in here. Every time I go to speak to poor old Daniel, the Finnish internet collapses on me.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, Eva, he is trying to distance himself, but here's something. When Alex Salmond was in the middle of his troubles, the first thing he did was, I'm not going to put the party in a position of being uncomfortable. I'm resigning from the party just now till I clear my name. Margaret Ferrier had hardly got off of the train at Central Station when she had the whip removed from her and she was getting told to resign. Should the Humza and the NEC at the SNP not be saying to both Mr. and Mrs. Sturgeon, I think you need to, in the short term, give up your memberships?
Well, it's very difficult to see why they would not voluntarily renounce their membership temporarily. Beyond that, there's an awful lot more that Humza needs to do. I think the phrase that Alex Salmond used in Coatbridge the other night was that Humza needs to bring the drawbridge down between himself and the previous administration, and that's right. It doesn't look too promising so far, though, because rather than bring the drawbridge down, what seems to be happening is that people are trying to slightly rewrite history, and in particular, their own part in history. That's evidenced perhaps most strongly by the item written by Mike Russell, the party president, today, where I think the headline is, "We're not going to see independence right now." Now, he writes there about some issues in the party as if there's a zip up the back of our heads and we don't somehow remember that he's been the president for the last few years and he's been an elder statesman and one of the grey men of the party for decades. So the First Minister may have changed. I cannot see any changes immediately in terms of strategy or public presentation, except that all of a sudden some are suggesting that Peter Murrell is really the only problematic part in the whole caboodle. But it's rather difficult to see how he can be the only issue when he was the chief executive officer over a period of time when his wife was the leader. So did they not speak to each other? I don't know the answer to that. They didn't. But in terms of what Humza has to do going forward, he needs to unite a party which is absolutely fractured. At the moment, there are various making press releases about, money that's been promised or double promised or be released by Humza. I mean, something he said the other day, I think he went up to Aberdeen, the Aberdeenshire area anyway, and he was talking about money for renewables. But the £25 million that he announced is part of a package previously announced by Nicola Sturgeon when she was First Minister. He announced the additional, I think it was 30 million or so, for the fuel fund. But when you consider the people who are eligible for that fuel fund, the extra money that he's just provided boils down to £6 per annum per household. That's 50 pence. 10 bob in old money is what he's provided. And the reason why we've got this, and the reason why I'm sitting in Dundee, which is becoming rivals to Glasgow in terms of the drugs deaths capital of Europe, And the reason why there are food banks proliferating and the reason why people are skint is because Mike Russell and Keith Brown and Nicola Sturgeon and yes, Humza Yousaf and yes, Neil Gray and yes, Kate Forbes did nothing to move the dial on independence when they were the party with the power and the ability so to do. Their party promised us a referendum in October. They promised us multiple referenda before this, but the date was fixed this time. We lost it, and we lost it primarily because it was never really a goer and it fell flat on its face when Nicola applied to the Supreme Court. Humza was part of that process. He was the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. The hate crime bill or act, which is not yet in force, none of these people are getting out of this scot-free. They are all, every one of them, liable for the fact that Scotland remains furrowed to a Westminster which is bleeding us dry and in effect responsible for our people starving and freezing, and it is simply unacceptable.
It absolutely is. But I'm going to do a wee case for Keith Brown and Mike Russell. A wee case because they then got to be slapped. Because when this first nonsense about the money came out, about the ring fence money, the party got Keith Brown to write a report, to do a report and write on what they would do. And they talked about new governs and proper auditing and monthly figures going to all the NEC, etc. And the books to be opened wide so that the members could see and it would be totally transparent. And it was a very good report. But Peter Murrell and others, and non-elected people from the NEC or in the leadership, blocked it. And Mike Russell knew. Mike Russell was backing the Keith Brown proposals. So for Mike Russell to turn around now and act as if, oh, I didn't know. He knew all right, Yvonne, like so many of them. And they chose not to do it. They gave it the old Admiral Lord Nelson. And we, lots of us, like on this programme and bloggers and other people, have been getting attacked and shunned and abused when we've been trying to tell them there's a problem here.
Well, I'm playing the smallest violin in the world for those, really. But who I also blame, and I know that the listening blame, is the membership of the SNP. That's who I blame, because when you fall asleep at the wheel of a democracy, all sorts of shenanigans will go on. And this, the membership was gelded back in 2018 with a series of events that should have alerted the members. But they've sat there asleep, watching these villains or alleged ne'er-do-wells getting away with all sorts of naughtiness. I think it was in the spring of 2018, head office suddenly sprung on the National Council that the NEC had decided to abolish national councils, which were already being marginalised. Where was the outcry in that? Mm. So this was started. The members of the National Council sat there like bookends and allowed themselves to be removed. And they were promised that a new structure of regional assemblies would be put in place. The National Council, I think, had met twice a year on a constitutionally required basis, but there is no clear record of how many regional assemblies have been held. They've been fragmented, poorly linked to each other. We're not finding this out. The members should have used the branches to demand what the hell is going on.
There's some question whether even minutes were kept at NEC meetings.
Well, I hear that the shredding machine, am I allowed to say this, Eva? The shredding machine is overheated in SNP HQ these days. But just before all of this happened, there were proposals to scrap even the regional steering committees and replace them with gatherings, nothing specific. But you can see when it's laid out in front of you, as you said, with the benefit of hindsight, you can see that the membership of the SNP has been defanged. And when I joined in 2011, the SNP was one of the most democratically accountable parties in the whole of the UK. And sniggering at all of the mess that the Tories were making of everything. Well, at the moment, pot kettle black. I think they're showing Tories, you lot are amateurs. This is how you do it. They've dismantled the party from within, and the members have allowed it to happen. And half of them are still defending to the last breath the likes of the Stirrells. And, so no wonder the social networks are absolutely boiling as people take it out on the SNP members. Blind loyalty is not a good quality at all. It's very destructive, and it shows when you're a wooden top what happens. And they have been sitting there. It is like a cult. They've been sitting there, groomed and manipulated, and allowed all of their power to be taken away from them. And that all started in the spring of 2018. And the structure of the NEC was altered. Originally, it had been about a dozen people, but now it's tripled in size with affiliated groups who added members without reference to the wider membership. So the wider membership just sat there and let it all happen. And they have to start and take accountability as well.
Well, I did opine this week. It's a fact. I noticed that the majority of these people who, got Wings Over Scotland banned off of Twitter and attacked me and attacked Grousey and attacked all the others and who've attacked Alba, they're all, the majority of them are people who joined post 2014. The newbies, the ones that came from Labour and the Tories and the Liberals and the Greens and came from God knows where, from school, most of them. They're the ones that caused the biggest problem. Phil, earlier this week as well, I think it was Eva or Yvonne, one of the two ladies there mentioned it earlier. During the week, Kate was quoted as saying that she thinks after what happened to Mr. Murrell, there should be a rerun of the election. What do you think?
I think it's pointless. I think it's while it remains in the hands. I mean, what Yvonne was talking about the NEC, that runs to the core of the problem here. The NEC of the People's Party of Scotland, the SNP, was first hobbled, then infiltrated. And that was you, Angus Robertson. You did this. You and your cabal did this. And you are working. You're the enemy within now. And a man I called my friend, a man I've had at my home, and with some very confidential discussions with some people who work for the establishment. And he had the gall to say, well, I'm not too sure if we can trust these people. These are military people that helped write the military section of the white paper in my house that I hosted. People I knew in the British military that were pro-Indy. And he says, well, I don't know if we can really trust them. Turns out it was him we couldn't trust. And that disgusts me. So rerunning of this, I mean, Kate, the problem is, those of us who have contacts, those of us who know people and have made contacts and who know the quandary, some of the stalwarts we've had on here also know what's going on. And I have information that tells me Kate cannot be trusted. So Just look at her position on independence. Just look at it. How can you trust Kate to give you independence given what she wants to do, what she's proposing? I mean, she's too chummy with Mike Russell, you know, and these were people that I had immense faith in when I was in the party earlier. I thought we were all on the same page. It's appalling, absolutely appalling. So I think it's pointless to run this. It's another sham, and this is the problem. You know, we've used all these tricks, these reports that you talked earlier about when we talked about some very good reports. There are mechanisms you can do. There are standard off-the-shelf reports that you can do to restructure. It's a common CEO practice. It's a common business practice. And they're well-trodden paths, words, processes and protocols, corporate governance. We all know how it works. These are used all the time. And you can run them out. And it doesn't matter if you don't get to the core and you don't remove the cancer within. It doesn't matter when you change the process. It makes no difference whatsoever. It's a facade and it's a show, and that's what's happening here. So for me, no, they can all get to hell. Bring back hanging, drawn and quartering. I jest, of course, but we do need to remove
Does
these.
he? Do you think he jests?
Maybe he's aye, maybe he's no, says Kerry Douglas.
Eva, Robin McAlpine, someone who's no stranger to this show, great guy. He wrote a fabulous article during the week where he said, you know, there was no nice ending there was no escape route for the SNP or the Scottish Government. But he did say, in line with what Phil was saying, that you need to get rid of your, suspend all of your NEC. Anyone that's within, 100 metres of any of the shenanigans that are going on that are being investigated, get rid of them. And clear the decks before you move forward. It's probably the only way, because there has been irreparable damage done to the SNP brand, is there not?
Robin hit the nail on the head, as he always does. Silence has been complicity. And, we're currently expected to trust and believe that Humza Yousaf, who tells us that a man can become a woman because he says so, and all of his cabinet, bar I think one who supported the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, were supposed to believe that they're now being honest and they're trustworthy and that they have Scotland's best interests and independence very much as their priorities. It's very difficult to swallow. Unfortunately for the SNP, though, as their popularity reduces, the popularity of other independence supporting parties, including ALAPA, increases. So ALAPA are now at 5% in the polls at least. We're about to overtake the Liberal Democrats. We beat the Greens in the by-election in Aberdeenshire earlier in the year. So independentistas have a home. From a national perspective, though, Humza's position now is really quite untenable. He's already said that there are processes he's having put in place to reorganise the party and deal with membership-related issues and democracy within the party. But if he doesn't get shot at the current NEC, he's only storing up more trouble, because in the eyes of the membership and in the eyes of the wider world, it's the NEC that have been complicit in some very stupid, short-sighted decision-making. Now, I count within that Keith Brown, because as you've already said, he was the guy who conducted research and wrote a report that said that on a monthly basis, the NEC should be presented with the actual income and the actual expenditure.
Yep.
Now, that was obviously ruled out by, we think, Peter Murrell and Kirsten Oswald. But if that is the case, I would have thought that somebody sensible like Keith Brown or somebody who was the elder statesman such as Mike Russell should have insisted that those decisions were countermanded. So if Humza's not prepared to open the books to the members, if he's not prepared to create a new NEC elected democratically by the members sooner rather than later, he's only going to hasten the demise of a once proud party.
Yeah.
And all of this is happening in the face of the most inept Tory government that we've ever seen. It's 10 years this weekend since Margaret Thatcher died. But, you know, whatever the hell she is, she's got to be laughing at the condition of Scottish politics, because at the moment, Westminster's running rings round the Scots. They're planning to continue the theft of our resources. You've seen innumerable Tory MPs make announcements to that effect this week.
Yeah.
Scotland's oil was the campaign of the 70s. Well, it's still Scotland's oil, and it's Scotland's gas, and it's Scotland's wind, and it's Scotland's water, and it's Scotland's whiskey. And you tell that, explain to the people of Scotland who are hungry or skint or worried or, you know, not getting the college courses that they need, not being able to go to the shops and buy the messages that they want, not getting to go on holiday to Europe, not getting to do all these things that are so dear, I suppose, and important and, you know, life-saving. Look at the NHS. It needs money, it needs resources, it needs staff. It needs people to come from abroad who want to work here. It needs people who already live here to want to take up a career in the NHS. But they can't do that because it's in crisis. We don't want to do it because it's in crisis. It's in crisis in part as the result of the actions of the most immediate past health secretary, who's now the First Minister. You know, how utterly ridiculous and pathetic is that? Scotland is full of talent. The Scottish political world is full of talent, expertise, knowledge, ability, strategies, vision, imagination, determination. Instead, we've got a cabinet that is unfortunately littered with people who've previously failed in other jobs, and some of them they've been summarily dismissed from. Remember Joe Fitzpatrick? Was he not the drugs minister? He was sacked. He's now back in as a minister. Shona Robson was probably the worst health minister Scotland's ever seen. Now she's the deputy first minister. How'd you get a job like that?
Finance secretary.
And finance secretary. I mean, for goodness sake, I've said before, she's a former pupil of my school, Alva Academy. It's got a lot to answer for. But by no stretch of the imagination can anybody in Scotland have the confidence that this current cabinet is the one to take Scotland through all the different crises that are facing us, to face down all the challenges at Westminster and come out the other side with a plan for independence. This cabinet can't cut it. Continuity doesn't cut it. And what Humza should do is what Mike Russell slightly tried to pretend he was hinting at. He needs to talk to other people. Humza should lift the phone to Alex Salmond this weekend. Hi, Alec, it's me. You gave me my first break when you employed me as, was it the T-boy in the office in Peterhead? By God, Alec, I need you now. That's what Humza should be saying. And the two of them could sit down there, and on the back of a fag packet, Alec could tell them exactly how to take Scotland to independence. He would start by saying Constitutional Convention. He'd complete it by saying a date for an electoral event, and he'd include within it walkouts at Westminster like Neil and Kenny did, and international action. That's it. There's your fag packet, Humza. I've done it for you, but lift up the phone Alec. You'll have him in speed dial, no doubt.
Yeah, well, I would say when you said the Alp Party at 5%, that was before the arrests this week and before things started dripping out. So I'll be interested to see the next opinion poll. And the other thing about, we suspect Peter Murrell and Kirsten Oswald stopped Keith Brown's report going through. Let's remember, neither Peter Murrell or Kirsten Oswald were elected to the NEC. They're not elected officials. They're appointed. And they were the ones that were stopping what the elected people wanted. So let's not forget that. Yvonne, there is no doubt this has damaged the SNP. Whether it's irreparable or repairable, time will tell. It depends on the actions they take. But what about the independence cause? Has it been harmed?
In many ways, I think the independence cause has become much stronger because people who are solely interested in independence have jumped the sinking ship that is the SNP in double quick time. And they are really committed to the independence cause. Now we've got the big march coming up all under one banner, which Humza Yousaf is supposed to be headlining. Would he headline it? Well, anyway, he's supposed to be there. And I spoke to the organisers, Neil Mackay, who you had on a few weeks back. And Neil is saying that at the moment they're looking at figures of over 20,000 upwards. I think it'll be more, because anybody who wants to dissociate themselves from the cult of the SNP needs to get to Glasgow for May the 6th. And I mentioned being in Coatbridge the other night. I was 5 minutes late from the appointed time that it was due to kick off, and I couldn't get in the door. I was 5 minutes late because I couldn't get parked. I couldn't get parked in the main street. And when I got to the door, thankfully they had a brilliant PA system. And you can hear Alex anyway when he's thundering. And my goodness, he was on fire. I saw Eva inside. She'll be able to tell you more about what went on inside. It was, if anybody was in any doubt that independence is on its last legs, they should have been in the Eagle Inn that night. It was incredible. It was, they could have had Bon Jovi on stage and they wouldn't have had that many people in. Everybody wanted to see and hear the de facto leader of the independence movement, who is Alex Salmond. Like it or lump it, he is the man who has never wavered once about independence. And I think he will lead it. Now, Chief Mammy, or the former Chief Mammy known as Nicola Sturgeon, surfaced on Saturday morning on the front lawn of her home, which the police tents and everything have now gone. And journalists that have been sitting and camped out overnight jumped as soon as they saw her with her jeans and her jumper. And she made a very brief statement to the Mail. She said that life had obviously been difficult after the arrest of her husband, amid the police investigation into its finances. And she told journalists that the scrutiny that comes on me as a public figure is difficult. And it was all in our 2 or 3 sentences. It was me, Chief Mammy, me. She's having a hard time. What about the tens of thousands of members she has betrayed? She started this Armageddon, and she had the cheek to tell journalists just a few days ago, oh no, my departure has nothing to do with this. Does she think we're all as stupid as the clones that have been groomed inside the SNP? The SNP is in the same situation as the Metropolitan Police, a corrupt organisation which needs to be shut down and started again from the rank and file for a root and branch change. And maybe Sir Mark Rowley can come up when he's finished reforming the Met and do something with the SNP, because the SNP is as rotten and as rancid as the Met. The focus has been on Peter Murrell, but we know that other homes were also raided, or other properties also raided by the police. The NEC should be sacked in its entirety, either through incompetence or something worse. They need to put the SNP in emergency measures. It's not fit for purpose. it is in a disastrous state. And, you know, when I switched on Sky News the other day and saw all the kerfuffle outside the First Minister's home, I thought, if this had been Chad or Nigeria or Zimbabwe, you'd think, oh gosh, you know, more corruption, another crisis. But it's not. It happened in Scotland, and it happened on the watch of the members who allowed, you know, I said that gelded themselves with all these reduction in powers. But another step which they also agreed was that the party leader, Chief Mummy, Nicola Sturgeon, pour me another drink, has sole discretion over the content of the party's manifesto. They gave all that power to Nicola Sturgeon. So the SNP could pass a policy at conference, but the power to reject that policy or to make up entirely different policies was in the sole preserve of the leaders.
And she did that. She did that with currency for a start. She ignored the will of the conference, which is meant to be, well, when we were all there, was the governing body of the party, and she ignored it.
Maybe get rid of the MSPs as well, who sit there you know, clapping away at everything that she said. They're all complicit. They've all got a hand in the downfall of a once great party, a party which is, you know, Alex Salmond was speaking at the other night, and he's so sad. That party was like a baby.
We all are. Yeah, I mean, a lot of us have been in the party a long time. I've got sadness. I've got more sadness than anger. But when you were you saw Eva and Eagle in. I take it she was at the bar. At the bar, were you? Were you Eva having a wee drink, wee swally?
You couldn't get to the bar either.
I would have got to the bar. Trust me, I would have got to the bar. Come hell or high water. Phil, we were talking about the British Labour Party were announcing great big plans that they're going to freeze the council tax down in England. They're going to build all sorts of infrastructure. There's going to be no unemployment. It's going to be the land of milk and honey. And as they've said quite openly, they're going to use British North Sea oil revenues and British North Sea renewable revenues to pay this. And at the same time, Tory Graham Stewart, I want to quote him, the UK net zero minister, was talking about how wonderful it is the UK has cheap, competitive, clean energy that drives economies, and with the unique geography, energy heritage, and expertise means we're in a prime position to create a thriving industry from secure, reliable, and affordable energy. Aren't the British so lucky?
Yes, they are, and it's the same old. It's been like this forever. There's a classic.
I should have said, and aren't the Scottish so stupid that they allow it to happen? I nearly said,
continue to be, but we've been infiltrated to cover. There's a lot of points here. The first one is a classic photograph from Greenwich down to the docks before Scottish oil. It was just bare docks. After the oil boom, you get Canary Wharf. And, you know, all through the Thatcher era, what she did with Scottish oil was destroy industry and create well, she obviously paid for a fair bit of social reconstruction as well, but destroyed industry. No, they'll continue to do that. I hear, you know, the SNP is irreparable. It's never irreparable. It can always be done, but we know how much it has to change, and the change has to mean that Hamza and his whole cabinet, none of these carpetbaggers should be included in an SNP that's genuinely interested in independence. And you look at the Hepburns, Mr. Hepburn is now in charge of independence. God, what's he doing? What's he done? Look, this guy's a carpetbagger, just another one of many who will not take us one step further. You know, you listen to somebody like Alex Salmond. I remember Alex saying, if the SNP's disbanded after independence, so be it. Cause before the party. I see none of that from any of these shysters. So until you start marching in a straight line and doing what we, the people, want you, you can jog on. And that goes with what Yvonne was talking about earlier with this. Humza's like, is he going to go to the coronation, or is he going to go to All Under One Banner? Because we're hearing that he's supposed to be going to All One Banner. He's named as a speaker. He's not told him he's not going. So if he doesn't turn up, I suggest what they do is they get a tub of lard and put it in his place. Just make sure it's halal, okay? And the other thing, this just goes on. This is a deliberate deconstruction of the SNP by the establishment that infiltrated it. It hobbled it, infiltrated it.
Well, that's what allows them to steal our resources.
Of course it is. And that's why it's happening. And all those that go along with, all of you, my ex-colleagues and would-be friends, you're not friends of the people of Scotland. You're not friends of the people. Our people continue to suffer, as Eva and Yvonne and many of us have articulated previously. And, and they're introducing strategies that are devised deliberately and imposed. We didn't vote for it. Remember the GRR? We're all coming down heavy on our told transphobic, or let's reiterate. Let's get the simple truth out there. We are all LGBT plus rights, all of us, and we support. That includes trans rights. But what we oppose is self-identification, and that was forced. That wasn't voted for. That wasn't in the manifesto. We've said many, many times. That was imposed upon us deliberately because it knew it would split. And it did exactly what it says in the tin. It did exactly what it said in the tin. And all of this continuation by Humza and Kate Forbes, who's not going towards independence. We need to call this out. I'm not going to pretend Kate's a friend of Kate, you're not. You're not. What's your plan for independence? If you seriously want to help the people of Scotland, you can jog on too. Sorry, no, time, enough of the carpetbaggers and the shysters. We need to tear it down to rebuild it, and it can only be done. And right now, I remember saying at the start of this, there has to be a proper clear out or a replacement, or we abandon the SNP. I never want to do that because it can be recovered, but it may end up playing second fiddle to Alba. But I actually don't want that. I want unification and proper unification with a genuine intent, and Humza isn't going to do it. Humza and this shyster cabinet of carpetbaggers aren't going to do it. So you are enemies, all of you, every single one of you, enemies within and enemies of the people. So, why it?
Moving on, time the clock kicking on, Eva, and there's a couple of other things that really we need to talk about. And one of them I want to talk about an event that happened this week, where and I want to have two questions on it to use our legal, and that was where a man avoided jail for raping a 13-year-old girl in a park. And it came from the new sentencing guidelines. Now, this is not it's not a political party. This is sentencing guidelines that is made up by the judiciary, if I'm not mistaken. Although maybe they get guidance from politicians, you can tell me. But the judge suggested that because this lad wasn't 25 at the time, his brain wasn't properly formed, so he wasn't in full control of his cognitive abilities, and didn't know he was doing right from wrong, and so therefore he was excused from a jail sentence. This isn't a country where we in Scotland at 16 can get married, join the army, pay taxes, change our sex apparently, but this was quite another nail in the coffin of the Scottish judiciary, was it not?
Is that to me, Roddy, or Yvonne?
You, Eva, you're the lawyer.
Oh, right, thanks. Right, the sentencing guidelines to which you refer are actually very well written, and they're produced by what the organisation called the Scottish Sentencing Council. And they arise from a lot of hard work and recognition that there were many young people who were coming into the criminal justice system having suffered trauma, parental issues, behavioural issues, psychological difficulties, and that it was not always appropriate to send them to prison for a long stretch because that was not necessarily going to assist in rehabilitation. So those guidelines are coming from a place that's very important, because in Scotland traditionally we've locked up far too many people who were unfortunate. You know, I get on my high horse in relation to women in prisons particularly, because so very many of those women are there primarily as the result of trauma, usually violence, often head injuries, and mainly perpetrated by men. Young folk were often in prison because they had got off to a bad start in life, not through their own fault. Now, it is accepted too that your brain may not be sufficiently mature until you're 25-ish to make some of the bigger decisions in life. That, though, is mitigation. It is not exculpation, as we say. And the issue here is the interpretation by the judge of the rules. So rather than speculate on a case which will likely become the subject either of an appeal on behalf of the accused against conviction and sentence, or it might become an application by the Crown in relation to a view that the sentence is unduly lenient, it would be good to look at the generality of the regulations, because they are very well written, very well motivated, but, and there's always a but, and it's a case like this one that throws it up, there are no exclusions from the rules, and this case would suggest that perhaps there should be some instances where a prison sentence is mandatory, and it perhaps might be up to the judge to have the discretion about the length of the sentence, but that the nature of the sentence ought to be prescribed in law. So I think this is a matter that is likely to be a case that's likely to be reviewed, but I also think that the generality will be under constant review, not only by the Scottish Sentencing Council, but I think that Faculty of Advocates and the like will have something to say. There are also, you know, various different professional bodies beyond legal people who feed into that process. So it's a highly unfortunate case, especially when one considers the views of the victim. But if we look at the bigger picture, hopefully there will be a sensible review comes out of this. What it also does, though, as you've said, is it shows us the differences in approach in different parts of the law. And that's a difficulty in relation to age, because I was involved in a meeting a while ago that had some folk from the Scottish Government in it, and part of the discussion was about the age of criminal responsibility, which was going to be increased in Scotland to the age of 12. And the really stupid thing is, because of the way the Scottish Government operates, at the point in time that they knew they were raising it to 12, they'd already been told that internationally they should raise it to at least 14, but they decided to do it in stages. So instead of scrapping consultations and processes relative to the age of 12, they carried on, knowing that no sooner would they have enacted the law that increased the age to 12, they were going to have to go through the same thing again in relation to raising it to the age of 14. So you wouldn't really believe sometimes the stupid way the Scottish Government operates until you're sitting in the middle of one of these meetings, you know, tearing your hair out. So yeah, there are problems, but they are able to be addressed. Is probably the most diplomatic way of putting it.
But the other thing that would get me, and I speak as a layman, and I don't know the circumstances behind this particular case. However, it took 4 years after the rape before this got to court. Now, I know there's delays for all sorts of reasons, but 4 years seems a ridiculous length of time for anyone, whether you're the victim of the crime or you're the person who's charged with the crime. 4 years seems a ridiculous length of time, Eva.
Well, it is far too long, but the other issue about this is that there was a backlog before the pandemic. It increased during the pandemic, and although the figures are starting to improve, they're not improving quickly enough. We've got more sheriffs and judges appointed, but business is still very slow in too many places. The criminal justice system is unnecessarily slow and delayed, but the civil justice system, especially in the context of family law, is in tatters. Because child welfare hearings are hardly ever taking place. Some of them are still conducted by Zoom. Some of them can still be done by telephone, would you believe? The legal aid system is a joke, a tragic joke though. So yes, there are delays, there are issues that need to be addressed. But remember, our current First Minister used to be the Cabinet Secretary for Justice.
Oh,
so
he has
something to say about that too.
No doubt. Yvonne, it was also revealed this week, your pal Keir Starmer admitted that he'd decided that Dick Leonard had to go. He got rid of Dick Leonard and organised for Anas Sarwar to become the new guy. Confirming once again what was said before, they're nothing but a branch office. It's a, so those people who think Labour are the answer to Scotland's problems, No, they're not.
Keir Starmer has shown what a nasty, out-of-touch man he is by refusing to allow Jeremy Corbyn to stand as an MP under the Labour banner in his constituency in Islington. And he is out of touch with what's happening on the street, which is hardly surprising because he can't get down and talk with normal people. I mean, he would have gone to Coatbridge the other night and thought he was on a different planet. He wouldn't have been able to engage anybody. You know, fantastic crowd. He's just so out of touch, and more so with Scotland. And
of course, the reason is Dick Leonard was very much a Corbynite.
Yes.
That's why he got rid of him.
You know, he's weaponized anti-Semitism to such an extent that 40 Jewish members of the Labour Party were hounded out of the party. It was astonishing, this McCarthy-style witch hunt, and he has presided over it. And I mean, he's another one that can't tell you what a woman is. And he was stuttering over, well, if a woman has a penis, is she a woman? And he didn't know. I hope his wife boxed his ears when he got in that night. I mean, really, you know, when the next election, whenever it is, comes up, I would urge all Prism listeners, the first question to ask is, what is a woman? You know, we say in Alipur, self-determination above self-identification. This is another thing that the SNP have brought upon themselves. And I released a statement earlier this week urging Humza Yousaf to ditch his desire to make the GRR official by going to the UK, taking the UK government to court.
Mental. And
people were saying, but he's got no choice. He has to, because otherwise a dangerous precedent will be set. Well, it's no use throwing good money after bad. And that is exactly what he'd be doing. But of course, as I keep saying,
it's not money, not his own.
It's not his own. It's not his own money. It's our money. We should be getting angry. Actually, we're a bit feckless when you look at the French. You know, the French, they've been told to increase the age of your pensions, and whoosh, they've gone up, they've torched Macron's favourite restaurant.
Yes, brilliant.
We should be besieging Holyrood right now. We should have a ring of steel around Holyrood and stop those corrupt members of stop the MSPs from going in, because they are not working for the people. They are not the people's servants. They're treating us like the servants. It's not bloody Downton Abbey. It's Holyrood. That's our parliament, and we need to seize it back. But one of the things Scotland has over England, its own independent legal system. And that legal system should be a shining beacon instead of resembling the legal crisis that's going on with the judiciary in England. You know, this is something that Humza Yousaf could own and develop and push ahead with all the energy that he'd reserved for the crackpot GRR bill.
I mean, for what it's worth, as I say, I feel that everyone, I was proud growing up that the Scotland separate law system, separate justice system, but to me, since Lockerbie down, it's gone from bad to worse, but that'll get me in trouble off all the legal profession. We're running out of time, and you've all gone off piece today. I've asked questions and you've answered other questions, which has been really interesting, which had kept me on my toes trying to bring it back. But no, you've all done your wee thing. That's what makes this programme good. There is no script, folks. But the last question, Phil, I want to stay on script, because you alluded to earlier about Humza, and I agree with you. Humza will show what's more important to him, the Windsors or Scottish independence. I know what I would choose, but then again, my hand up, I'm a Republican, but I would be marching for Scotland every day. The news came out this week that President Joe Biden has rejected an invite to the coronation. He's not going to go. So for all the Brits, this is a wee bit of a slap in the teeth, is it not? It sort of shows them that the special relationship's a one-way street, and they're kidding themselves on if they think the Americans give a tuppenny toss about them.
It's always been the case, and you saw it, I think, historically, when you looked at the Suez crisis, when France and Britain were told to jog on. And there's no special relationship. There never has been. It's a myth. And if you look at the Marshall Plan and the debt and the payment, I think, which was completed in 2015, if you look at how the corporations and how America's operated for the interest of America, and you can't blame them. But the problem with that is that now it's become the corporations that run America, and that's how America operates. For the American people, wonderful as they are suffering every bit as much as us. So no, Joe Biden doesn't give a damn. It's about time, and it's about time everybody cottoned onto that, and this makes it rather obvious, does it not?
Indeed it does. Now, we're running out of time, and I know, for example, our Hazel, who's helped, is one of our techies, ladies and gentlemen. As soon as this is finished, she's heading down to Dundee to get for the gathering. Eva's got to get to the gathering. Phil's going to try and make it up. He's in London as we speak, but he's going to try and get there. We've got to do that. So what I didn't mention at the beginning, I should have. If you haven't already liked the show and you haven't liked it, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you don't miss again, because, for example, this week, we're doing a midweek special, and I've got some very special guests with me, and we're going to do a special show on multipolarity. Our Phil's been dying to do one of these for weeks and weeks and months, and we're now going to do it, and I'm bringing in some big guns for the midweek. But until we are back next week, and we'll have to get Daniel back as well, because poor old Daniel, they joined NATO, and Vladimir Putin screws their internet. He wasn't able to participate. So bloody Russians, what they're like. So we'll get Daniel back sometime, maybe when he's not in Finland, or he's got his internet sorted. But till we see you all again, you and yours, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.